Good evening. How are you?
Good evening. How are you? It's so good to see you.
You too.
Yes.
Long time no see. How have you been?
Doing well, blessed, very blessed. I can say that for sure.
Yeah. Well, Wendy, this is my husband. This is Howard Washington. This
Nice
is
to meet
Wendy
you,
Smooth.
Wendy.
It is such
Dr.
a
Wendy Smooth.
it
What
is
a
such a
pleasure.
pleasure to meet you.
Faculty affiliate with the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity at OSU. And this evening, Dr. Smooth will be sharing information about voting history. Our next panelist will be Deidre Reese Brown, who is State Board Member and Columbus Convener of the Ohio Unity Coalition and the owner and founder of Brown Girls Consulting. Deidre is affiliated with a number of community groups, her faith community, and public service organizations. A native of Columbus, Ohio, Deidre holds a bachelor's degree in sociology and anthropology and a master's degree in public policy. Deidre has a long history of advocacy and service and has worked professionally for more than 30 years in the public policy and advocacy arenas. Some of Deidre's experience includes working as a lobbyist for 10 years and serving as a legislative aide for nearly 8 years in the Ohio House and Senate. Deidre is a staunch advocate for voting rights and has worked on national teams to develop strategies to provide research that has resulted in significant wins for voting rights, both in state and federal courts throughout the nation. Deidre has offered testimony before state and congressional committees on topics ranging from insurance and health care to education and civil rights. Deidre has a strong interest in civil rights, fairness, and justice. She is passionate about helping people understand and use their political power and influence. She has successfully woven her personal and professional passions together to give a voice to people who are often marginalized. And this evening, Ms. Reese will be sharing information about the voting process. Our third panelist this evening is Ed Leonard, JD, who is the current director of the Franklin County Board of Elections. Director Leonard was appointed to this position in September 2016. Director Leonard is no stranger to election administration. He oversaw the recent implementation of a new countywide voting system and is currently guiding the implementation of a new voter registration software system. Ed was born and raised in Youngstown, Ohio. He earned his law degree from the Cleveland Marshall College of Law in 1990 and his undergraduate degree in business administration from Youngstown State University in 1987. Ed's legal career began as captain in the U.S. Army's Judge Advocate General Corps from 1990 to 1994. After moving to Columbus in the fall of 1994, he was in private practice for several years before serving as Assistant Columbus City Attorney Prosecutor from 1997 to 1998. When not working on behalf of the Franklin County community, Director Leonard proudly serves on the board of the Harmony Project, which is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to promote diversity and community service through singing, serving, and sharing. And this evening, Director Leonard will be speaking to us about election administration in Franklin County. And now, Dr. Wendy Smooth will be speaking to us.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rayfield. It's such a pleasure to be in the company of Second Baptist tonight, and I thank Ministers Washington for inviting me in to share with you. And I have to say that you all are in the greatest of Black church traditions in making sure that our people have access and understanding of not only the importance of the vote, but how to use it. And so I thank you for being a force in our community. And when this thing we call COVID is over, I look forward to sharing some fellowship time with you. Tonight, I want to share some of just the broad history that reminds us of why we take the vote so seriously, particularly as African Americans. This is not performance for us. This is bloodshed. And I will start with why we do this, and I'll end with why, on a very personal level, the vote is so awfully important to me. The Constitution and all of our documents always remind us that as a democracy, we are in process. We are not finished. We are in process. In every election that we hold in this country, we are further developing the concept of we the people and who is included and how we are included in we the people. And for Black people in particular, this has been of tremendous importance because for so long, we were not considered people at all. This year is a really important marker of our struggles, of our triumphs. This is the 150th anniversary of the passage of the 15th Amendment. And it is the 15th Amendment that passed during Reconstruction, one of the Reconstruction amendments that actually offered African-American males the right to vote and to access to voting. But as we well know from time-honored teaching of our history, this access to the ballot provided by the amendment had to be hard fought and socialized into this country. So even with the passage of the amendment, many of our brothers and sisters, particularly across the southern states, still lacked access to the ballot through the inaction of what we well know as the Jim Crow laws. But here is the actual worded verbiage of the 15th Amendment, which gives the right of citizens of the United States to vote. It shall not be denied or abridged on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So that speaks to our ancestors' formerly enslaved status. And as I said, again, women were not a part of this particular moment. But as we know, of lots of Black women on this call and the backbone of our church communities, we continue to fight. And it is with the passage of the 19th Amendment that we also commemorate this year in its 100th year celebration. And I always like to show several of these photos together because as you see, the famous photo protesting President Wilson's exclusion of women's rights to vote. It was a major historic march and one that we have celebrated all year long. But the untold story is that though our African-American women sisters had been at the forefront of pushing for female suffrage, when it was time to march in Washington, we were asked to step to the back of the line. And I can say ever since that day, we marched. We marched because we believed in the broader cause, which speaks to the ways in which Black women have always made sacrifices for the broader cause and the promise of what was to come in their own right. But they stood at the back so that we could stand at the front. And we have opportunities at the moment to see Black women stand all the way at the front. Let me move to the next slide. Now, though we were granted the right to vote through the 15th Amendment and then for white women in particular through the 19th Amendment, it wasn't until the passage of the Voting Rights Act that these things became totally realized for African Americans and the potential for African Americans. And even at that time, when we were ushering African Americans in as voters, I want to share with you, we had to educate, as we are doing today. We had to socialize people into voting. And in particular, we had to tell Black people how unsafe the vote was, exercising the franchise would be, at the same time that you encourage people. So as Pastor said, information is power. And so we would have these kinds of booklets that circulated. We've heard of the film, The Green Book. The Green Book talked about where we could travel and stay comfortably. But these pamphlets, like the one that I'm showing here, told you the steps that you needed very clearly, particularly in the southern states, to circumvent the powers of Jim Crow. And we know that our foremothers, such as Fannie Lou Hamer in my home state of Mississippi, is very much a part of crafting these kinds of petitions for African Americans to carry around in terms of the information they needed to register to vote. But even beyond that, we knew it took a lot more. We have the next slide. We had to continue to educate. And this is just a clip of the Highlander Folk School in Tennessee, where people went and studied across the summer. See, we had to prepare for Freedom Summer. We had to prepare to take people into the treacherous areas of the South in order to vote, where people would ask you in terms of a literacy test, not ask you who was your county commissioner, but ask you how many bubbles was in a bar of soap. And those are the things that our foremothers and forefathers encountered. And places like the Highlander Folk School, and that's Septima Clark at the very center of that photo, a true heroine of the civil rights movement, who worked her whole life as an educator to educate people about the importance of voting. And from that, and we know in the Black church tradition, the power of Sunday schools. Sunday school was a place where we taught civics and we taught education around the vote. And it was inspired by and following places like the Highlander Folk School, where we taught people how to organize, how to be in battle around the vote. Next slide, please. Our good brother who educated us on good trouble. In our commemoration of Representative Lewis's life, we have to take it to the bridge, as the young people would say. And it's at that bridge, at that moment, where the nation had to recognize the peril of the violence across the South and the violence and bloodshed for the simple act of voting and of inclusion. But it's there at the bridge that the nation had to watch the Southern atrocities on their televisions. And I like to remind young people that once upon a time, we had 3 television stations. And all 3 television stations showed us the same thing. And they also went off at a certain time. I need that in my household right now. But the nation was forced to watch, and they watched the atrocities, and they saw people simply asking for the right to vote that was already ensured by the Constitution, right? We marched, and that public showing, next slide, led Lyndon B. Johnson to pass and to sign into law the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And it is at the point in which we signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that we see both the 15th Amendment and the 19th Amendment come into fruition, come into action for African Americans. This did away with the literacy test, the poll taxes, the harassment of voting, protected in Southern states in particular, where the atrocities were so extensive, protected people from simple things like changing and closing the voting polling places. Now, let me say this, next slide. Next slide. Is not the next slide? Okay, now. This is a quote from President Johnson during the passage of the Voting Rights Act, saying that it was deadly wrong to deny any fellow American the right to vote in this country. Next slide, please. This is the moment when we vote that we are finally declaring we have the opportunity to get on top of Jim Crow and knock Jim Crow down, because we knew that if we could vote and we could hold elected officials accountable, we could protect our social interests and we could protect our economic interests. But without the vote, we would not have access to protecting our community in very broad ways. Next slide, please. But let me share with you, in 2013, a pivotal court case was decided using the election of President Barack Obama as testament that we no longer needed the protections that were provided by the Voting Rights Act. And it was a slim margin of a 5-4 decision that decided that we could afford in this country, based on our racial progress, with the election of a Black president in Barack Obama, to move away from the controls of the federal government on states in order to allow states the liberty to govern their election law as states are guided to do in their own right. Next slide, please. At the time that the Shelby v. Holder case was decided by the Supreme Court that took away the protections of oversight of the federal government, these were the states, the dark ruby red states were the states that were protected under the most honored component of the Voting Rights Act, which is Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act made sure that localities could not make just frivolous changes to their voting laws, could not make frivolous changes to their polling places, could not move polling places at the last minute without the federal government clearing their plans for change. In 2013, we no longer had those protections on the books. And also, I want to say, because Black people have always looked out for those who come behind us. So it's Black and brown people who are impacted by the absence of the Voting Rights Act, because also the Voting Rights Act provides that ballots are to be translated into languages of local communities. And we no longer require that according to federal statute. Next slide, please. So here is what we have. The politics of today. We have polling places that can close across the nation at will. And I want us to be very clear about this particular upcoming election cycle and how critical this is for African Americans and communities of color. Due to the economic hardships of COVID, states and localities are making decisions to not open particular polling places because of the economic cost. And it's true that there are economic costs to running particular polling places in the geographical locations that we would like to see them in. However, when we close polling places in rural communities where African Americans predominate, we are talking about 50 or more miles that some of our people have to travel in order to access the ballot. We are talking about, with the erosion of the Voting Rights Act, we're talking about challenges to early voting. Right here in the state of Ohio, we were front and center in the conversations on early voting and the closing dates of early voting. And I want to point out, for Black churches in particular, there's a reason why there was so much energy around the Sunday prior to the election as a pivotal point of contestation, of litigation, right, over the Sunday prior to the election, because Black churches, and in particular, Black women within Black churches, were organizing. There were voting rights committees in churches like Second Baptist who were charged up, fired up, and taking their members from the pulpit and the pew to the polling place on buses. And we in Ohio were a part of that tremendous movement of people, which gave greater access. There's a reason why that Sunday became such a contentious moment for when we vote. The last thing I want to pick up here is voter ID laws, and then I'll move on. I want you to understand that post the erosion of the Voting Rights Act is when we start to see this incredible rise and increase in the requirement of very restrictive voter ID laws in states across the country. And it is no error that particular states have gone harder than others. In the state of Texas, you can attend the University of Texas with a university ID, but that university ID issued by a state entity cannot be used to vote in the state of Texas. So young people are disenfranchised in their vote. Next slide. I want to remind us why we vote. This is generational. When I vote, I take my children to vote. My parents woke up, and my dad was a business owner. And so he woke up very early in the morning. And we were charged with getting in the car and going to the polls with him, because it was just that important that we understand generationally that this is something that was hard fought by our community. And in my household, we get up early in the morning and take children to vote. And my friends tease me, you're committing voter fraud if that young one is selecting the button and put, so don't anybody report me. But it is important. They get fired up, they are excited, and they are asking me already, Mom, is your soror going to be president one day? And I say yes, because Black people will turn up and turn out to vote. I turn over my time. Thank you all. Look forward to questions and dialogue.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Smooth. For those of you that are on the call, again, welcome. We're glad you're here. We've heard from Dr. Wendy Smooth. You can use what is called your chat function on Zoom, and it should be located for many of you at the bottom of your screen, but you can click on chat and put any of your questions that come up during the course of our presentation tonight. We encourage you to use the chat. We will be looking into the chat and looking for questions. We'll have a Q&A period a little bit later on. And we will go over and offer the questions up to our panelists for a response. And now, everyone, get ready. We're going to hear from Deidre Reese. She is no stranger to us. Deidre?
Thank you very much, Minister Washington. I want to say thank you to Second Baptist Church, which is still my church home. Even though I'm at another place, I'm still a part of the family. Thank you, Dr. Smooth, for the information that you just presented. And I'm going to go ahead and move into information about the voting process. Next slide. So I wanted to start with talking about who can actually vote. In the state of Ohio, anyone who is 18 years of age and registered 30 days before an election, registered where they actually live or where they reside, and who is not currently incarcerated and convicted of a felony can vote in the state of Ohio. One thing I wanted to point out, because many people don't know, even if you are a former felon, a person who has served time in a correctional facility, if you are out of prison or jail, you can still register and vote. You have that right in the state of Ohio. You can still vote. Next slide. As long as you register again, even if you're in a halfway house, on house arrest, under any type of correctional control, if you re-register, you can still vote as long as your conviction is not related to any type of election related offense. So you have that right. Please share that information. If you have a misdemeanor and you are still actually awaiting trial, you can vote. If you're on parole, you can vote. House arrest, you can vote. People think that that is not a restored right in Ohio. Please share that information. Just let people know, as long as they are registered 30 days in advance, they can vote. You can move ahead. Thank you. One thing we want everyone to do is check their registration now. Many people think that their registration is up to date. That may not be the case. Right now, in 15 states, $50 million is being spent on suppressive tactics. So misinformation, voter confusion, intimidation, and even challenging people's registration. Ohio was one of those 15 states. we absolutely expect that minority and low income voters are going to be challenged. If you or somebody you know gets that challenge, don't just sit back and take it. Stand up and fight. And there is an organization called Election Protection. Call 866-OUR-VOTE. Call that number. Make certain that someone knows. Don't just walk away. Don't just take it, because we can stand up and there are people who will fight on your behalf to make certain that those who would challenge you don't just get away with it. Move forward to the next slide. And again, it's not just policy that is challenging what is going on, and we certainly have seen a number of different things. In fact, in your spare time, look up House Bill 680. There are some things that happened today on House Bill 680. So write that down, House Bill 680 here in Ohio. Check out what's going on with that. I don't have time to go into it. But not only can policy challenge your right to vote, individuals can challenge your right to vote. So one of the tactics that we have been seeing in a lot of different states, and I know that it's going to happen here in Ohio because I purposefully put myself on lists so that I can see what people are doing. They're planning on sending postcards to individuals who are on a list who have not changed their address, because remember I said you have to have your voting registration where you actually live. They want to send postcards with the hope that it returns to them so they can say, aha, Deidre does not live at this location where she's registered. In 2016, one man in the state of North Carolina successfully challenged 3,500 voters and got them taken off of the roll. So if you think it doesn't happen in Ohio, in 2012, one woman challenged 308 people here in our county, Franklin County. Now, fortunately, she was not successful, and that's only because she came in and she said, well, somebody told me to challenge these people. I didn't know what I was doing. But just imagine how many people get challenged by an individual. We don't want to see that happen. So we want people to avoid that from happening by checking their own registration and move forward. The Ohio Unity Coalition has a tool where you can check your registration. So you can go to ready.vote. And actually, we have 4 different buttons there. So you can check your registration, you can register to vote, you can make a commitment to vote, where we can come back and sort of, tickle you a little bit and say, hey, remember now you can actually start the early vote. And then you can also track your ballot through our website in advance. So this lookup will allow the Unity Coalition to collect your data. So again, we can reach out to you and say that it's open. And here you can enter your information. It's very simple. So I just put myself in as an example, first name, last name, my zip code, and then contact information with my phone number and my email address. And there's a little box there that, says I agree to be contacted. And then you click next. And then it's going to take you to the Secretary of State's website. So this way you can look up from anywhere in the entire state, any county, and then again, put your first name, last name in your county, and there's a drop-down menu so you can select your county. Go forward. And then it's going to pull up your name. Now, it just so happens here in Franklin County, there are actually 2 Deidre Reeses. So I would select myself based on what my address is, then click there again. And then it's going to actually show my name, my address, my polling location, my precinct, and then also my legislative district. So if I want to go and look up information about the candidates who are running in those districts, that information is there. Next slide. And I just blew this up a little bit so you can also see that there is a link there, the first little highlight there. You can actually follow that link so that you can update your information. If you're already registered, you can actually update online right here on this site. Also, if you have an Ohio issued driver's license or an Ohio state ID, you can update your information there as well. If you don't have those, it will link you to a paper copy that you can fill out and mail in. And this page just shows you the information that you need. So your driver's license number or state ID number, your birth date, your name, obviously your address, and the last 4 digits of your social security number. There are some people who are concerned that, there could be fraud, and I know you all probably heard that noise in the system. I tell people I am not as concerned about utilizing this information because, if somebody has your name and your address, it's highly unlikely that they have your driver's license number, your date of birth, as well as the last 4 digits of your social security number. And if they have that, we have a few more problems to be concerned about than voter registration. So we need to be taking care of that. But this is a good tool for you to have to be able to get your registration up to date. Next slide. Filling out the voter registration form. I wanted to point out a couple of things that are common mistakes that people make with filling this out, just so that you know, because the registration deadline is not until October the 5th. Next slide. One, print legibly. If it can't be read, it probably will be wrong in terms of how it is entered into the system. On the form, the very first 2 questions, number 1 and number 2 are you a citizen and are you over 18? Very often people just skip over those. They are not going to process it very likely in many counties, most counties, if you don't answer those 2 questions. Number 8 on the form asks for your county, but sometimes people see country, and you'd be surprised at how many times I will see USA in there, simply because they misread that because they're going sort of fast. Question number 9 asks for your birth date, but people tend to put the date that they're actually filling out the form. That will invalidate your voter registration form. So we want to make certain that we pay attention to date of birth as opposed to date. Number 11 is optional, where it asks for a telephone number. I always encourage people to fill that information out, even though it says optional on most county forms or something equivalent to optional, because if there is a problem, we want them to be able to reach back out to you so that a correction can be made versus it just not being processed. Number 14, there's a box where you are to sign. That is what they use for the poll book, where your signature is going to appear. So if you get real fancy and go all outside of the box, your signature may end up not matching when you go in, and you don't want someone to challenge you for a non-match on your signature. So I just say, don't be fancy for the sake of your registration, and also because you might forget and not do it the way you normally do. Sign it the way you always sign your signature, and sign it inside that little box that they have there. And then finally, it asks for you to actually date it. Sometimes, again, people will switch for their birth date there as opposed to the actual date. So those are just very common mistakes that we see on a voter registration form. Next slide. Okay, so by now, every Ohio voter should have received an absentee application from the Secretary of State. Those started going out at the end of last month. If you have not received that, or someone you know has not received that, that's an indication that there's something wrong with the data in the system. And we want to make certain, again, that people check their registration, and I will refer back to that ready.vote website. Election mail is not forwardable. So if you have not received it, that means something is wrong, and we need to be certain to get that fixed. You have to be registered where you live. So if you check your information, it'll only take a couple of minutes to get it up to date. And we don't want someone who wants to vote to not be able to vote when we can make a very simple and quick correction so that they have a chance to participate. Next slide. Reasons that your registration might not be correct. You've moved since the last time you actually registered. You got married or divorced, changed your name. There could be a typo. Remember I said if it's not legible when you filled out the form, somebody else is typing that information in. So there could be, a mismatch there. A letter or a number could be transposed, and that could be a reason why it did not get mailed to you, since it's not forwardable. And we've seen people get challenged even on that type of an error, which was innocent, but it could cause an issue. There's also this dynamic where if a person has not voted for 2 federal elections, they can end up on a list to be purged. So if you were purged from the list for not voting, you may not have gotten that form. And I just wanted to point out, this really important piece of data. In Ohio, since 2019, 250,000 people have been purged. But if we go back to in 2 years, and I didn't put this on here, but it's just a little factoid that I know. In 2 years, between 2004 and 2006, 13 million people got purged in the United States. That's a whole lot of folks. So we don't want to, we don't want it to be us, and we don't want it to be anyone that we know. And right now, 115,816 people are on the list to be purged in Ohio in 2021. So we want to make certain that everybody checks, because we don't want to see them purged at all. Now, nobody who's on the list currently to be purged are going to come off of the roll for this election, or so we're told. But we know there are a lot of lawsuits that are going on. So if somebody sues and there's a decision, because remember, Dr. Smooth said we do not have the protection of Section 5 anymore. We just don't know what will happen. So check, make certain, don't leave yourself vulnerable to falling through that particular crack. Next slide, please. Okay, let's talk about voting absentee in Ohio. Anybody who is a registered voter in Ohio can vote absentee. We don't need to have an excuse. That used to be the case, but we don't have to do that anymore. All you have to do is request an absentee ballot, submit it accurately, and turn it into your own county board of election. In addition to folks who reside still in the county, uniformed and overseas citizen can vote absentee. Hospitalized voters or parents of a hospitalized child can actually vote absentee. So if that is the case on election day, you can request an absentee ballot. A person who is incarcerated but not convicted, or incarcerated for a misdemeanor, as I said before, they can vote absentee as well. So we want to make certain that people have that information, because we don't want them to be disenfranchised. And then the absentee, the actual ballots will be mailed beginning on October the 6th. So as long as you have submitted your request, you will start receiving them on October the 6th. Next slide. And just a little bit of information. Did you know if you vote absentee, you can actually track your ballot to make certain that it has arrived at your county board of election? In Franklin County, Fairfield and Licking, all of them, which I know are serviced by Second Baptist, all of them allow you to track your absentee request. And Franklin County has a rather sophisticated tool. So anybody who lives there, you can check it out on their site. And the earlier you vote, obviously, the more time you would have to track your ballot. And hopefully that'll mitigate maybe some concern that people have about voting by mail. And next slide. And I just wanted to show, I know this is a little bit hard to see, but the Secretary of State also has a statewide ballot tracking tool that is electronic. In the live version of it, you can actually click on the outline of your county and it'll take you directly so that you can track your ballot anywhere in the entire state. And that's something new that has not always been the case, but it's something that they instituted for this 2020 general election. Next slide. Some common mistakes that happen on the absentee application, and we want to make certain that this doesn't happen so that you can actually get that, submit it one time and get it in and not have any problems. Same as with the voter registration form, confusing date of birth with the actual date that you fill it out. Illegible writing, so we want to print clearly. You also have to mark which election you are trying to vote absentee. On the form, there is general election, primary election, special election. Don't assume they know based on when you turn it in. If you don't mark it, they're going to go, it's an incomplete form. So for this election, obviously you would want to mark general election, and there's a place where you put in the date. Some counties may actually populate, November 3rd, 2020. Don't assume that's the case. Write it in if it's blank. Another big issue is lack of identification. And I will tell you what all that identification is that you need. Failure to sign the required statement. It's basically an affidavit that says you understand what you're requesting and what happens when you request it, and then not actually signing, or I'm sorry, not dating the form. Next slide. The type of identification that you have to provide, and these are you can choose which one of these. So a driver's license number or the Ohio issued ID number, the last four of your social security number. Next slide. And then a copy of one of the following. So you actually have to photocopy and include this with your absentee application. The copy of your current and valid photo ID, and a little asterisk here. Because of COVID, they are extending the time period. So if you have a license that expired between March the 9th and November 3rd, they are allowing that to be considered valid and current. So any other time it would not be, but because of COVID and understanding that BMVs were closed and people, are furloughed, lost their job, their financial challenges, they are allowing, even if it's expired, just between that window, to count that as a current and valid photo ID. Or you could use a military ID, a current utility bill, which is within the last 12 months, a bank statement, a government check, or a paycheck, and all of those have to have your name and current address, or a government document. What is not something that you could use as a ID is a copy or notice of your voter registration. That's also one of those strange things, and I see Dr. Smoot, you're kind of smiling, even though we say, yes, we recognize you're a registered voter and you had to provide some information to be a registered voter. Strangely enough, that's not one of the things that they will accept as valid for voting. Imagine that. Next slide. Okay, now, how do you vote? If you're registered in Ohio by October the 5th, which is the deadline, you have a couple of options. You can vote early in person at the Early Vote Center, October the 6th through November the 2nd, not November the 3rd if you're voting early in person. You can vote absentee by mail, but if you do it by mail, it has to be postmarked by November the 2nd. So don't mail it on November the 3rd, right? But you can deliver an absentee ballot to the Board of Election by 7:30 p.m. on election day. Now, if you want to deliver it in person on election day, you cannot take it to your own polling location. You have to take it to the Board of Election. So make certain you remember that. But if you do it on election day, remember you can do that between 6:30 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. Now, obviously, election day voting at your polling location, November 3rd, 6:30 a.m., 7:30 p.m. Don't wait, vote early, avoid problems and unexpected delays. 7:30 p.m., you have to be in line on election day. You can't get in line at 7:31. They're going to cut it off. If you run into traffic, can't find parking or whatever the case may be, nobody's going to make accommodation for you. So just play it accordingly. Assume something is going to go wrong and cause a delay so that you can get there and not be disenfranchised. Next slide. And I just shared this because I know this is going to be shared, for people to be able to access later. But I did want to point out between the 6th and the 16th, early voting hours are 8 a.m. to 5, but then they shift. You have a longer time, an extra hour, the 19th through the 23rd, and then we have weekend hours. And then the last week, they go from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. So I just wanted to make certain that you all understand they are a little bit different and we need to pay attention to that and plan accordingly. But the last day of early voting, it ends at 2 p.m. I know I had this happen a lot of times. People thought that early voting was open until 5 p.m. that last day. It ends at 2 p.m. So just wanted to make certain that you all are aware of those hours. And this is posted all sorts of places, but I wanted to share it with you. Next slide. With absentee by mail, as I said before, your ballot has to be postmarked by November the 2nd. And I wanted to point out, and I'm sorry, I realized today when I looked over this that I spelled sufficient wrong twice. Your postmark cannot be like a Pitney Bowes machine or a computer stamp. That does not count for election mail. It has to be a post office postmark. If you are taking it in or you're mailing it on November the 2nd, I suggest you go inside and actually have them postmark it in your presence so that you don't have a problem. Don't just hand it to them, because if they don't get to it and it's not postmarked, it's going to be considered late. But even with a postmark, it still has to arrive by the 10th day after the election, which is the 13th. And I know you guys have heard all this conversation with, as I like to call them, the occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. You know, oh, the US mail is not going to get there on time, you know, blah, 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 blah. I wouldn't wait until the 2nd is all I'm saying, if you're going to mail it. So don't wait till the last minute. Next slide. You also can use the ballot drop box. Every county has one ballot drop box. There was a decision today that said that's not enough, so it may be more. It's being challenged and appealed already, but there will be at least one. Those drop boxes are monitored 24/7 and emptied each day, so you can drop those off again on election day as late as 7:30 p.m. Next slide. Who can turn in an absentee ballot for other people? All your family, basically. It's a very exhaustive list. What I don't want you all to do is collect them for, you know, everybody at Bible study, or everybody, you know, that comes to choir rehearsal and take a whole batch of them. It really is your family members that you can turn in an absentee ballot on behalf of another person. Next slide. Okay, you also obviously have election day voting at your own precinct. Polling locations open at 6:30 a.m. Avoid long lines, try off-peak hours, you know, when the polls first open, middle of the afternoon, avoid rush hour. If you have requested an absentee application and change your mind and want to vote at your polling location, you have to vote a provisional ballot, and that is on that statement that you sign. Remember I said that's one of the issues that can get your absentee application rejected. When you sign that, it actually says you understand that you will have to vote a provisional ballot if you show up. You have to drop off that ballot though, at that absentee ballot election day at your Board of Election, not your polling location, in order for it to be counted. Next slide. Okay. If you're in line at 7:30 on election day, you have a right to vote. Don't leave. If you're already in line, they have to let you vote. If you're told your name is not on the poll book, you have to be given a provisional ballot. Don't let someone tell you you're not here, go home. Absolutely not. It's already said, plan for traffic, weather, parking, whatever type of potential delay, but don't wait until the last minute. Anything can happen, and you had all those options for early voting, at least, that you can take advantage of that. You take advantage of voting by mail as well. Next slide. Encourage other people to participate in the election. We still have time to get them registered by October the 5th. You can have, you know, encourage people to check their registration out or update their registration at ready.vote. Early vote again starts on October the 6th and runs through 2 p.m. on November the 2nd. Call, email, text your family and friends, worry them to death, whatever you have to do, you know, participate in the election. You know, it's a life or death situation, and let them know they can mail or drop off their ballot at the early vote locations. Next slide. No matter what they do, no matter what you do, how you plan to vote, do it early, by mail, by drop box, in person. Be safe if you vote in person. Practice social distancing. Give yourself enough time to deal with the unexpected. I think that's my last slide, if I'm not mistaken. All righty.
Thank you so much, Deidre Reese. The questions are pouring in, so we're going to have an opportunity to engage here shortly. I want to check to see, is Ed Leonard on the call?
Yes, I am.
Well, Ed, it's your turn. We're ready to hear from you.
Let's see. Well, I'll just get started. I want to thank you for having me. By first, I really do appreciate that. I want to thank Dr. Smooth and Deirdre Reese for their explanation of the process, because that really a lot of what I would have covered. So I really gives me an opportunity to focus on some other important matters. And the first of those is just want to let everyone know what measures are in place to ensure that the ballot is secured and that it's counted. And then I just wanted to go over some of the COVID-19 precautions that we're taking at the Board of Elections for in-person voting and Election Day. I also want to reassure you, I know that during the primary, we've seen a lot of polling locations around the country in states where the polling locations had to be closed because of budgetary issues or about poll worker shortages. And right now, Franklin County, we do not anticipate, well, we're not going to have any closures. We've been recruiting a lot of poll workers, and we certainly would welcome more poll workers, but we have enough poll workers that we'll be able to keep every location open. We don't want to consolidate locations. We're not moving in that direction. There's no intent to close locations. So again, I agree with all the speakers so far, is that we want to encourage you to vote early. Vote early. Don't wait till Election Day, because oftentimes, life happens on Election Day and might keep you from getting to the polls. So take advantage of the early vote process. And also, if you get mail from the Board of Elections, be sure to open it right away. Don't set it aside. Don't, I'll get to it. If you get mail from the Board of Elections, open it, because if there is an error on your application, if there is an error on your voter registration, we're going to contact you. So you're going to see something in the mail from the Board of Elections. So when you get that, open it and follow the instructions for any correction that you're instructed to give. In terms of the measures we take to secure your ballot, there is a bipartisan team involved in every aspect of handling your ballot. I know Judge Reese, he and I served alongside one another when he was director of the Board of Elections back in the early 2000s. And again, we know that the staff at the Board of Elections, they are sworn to uphold the election laws. These are election professionals. They're not going to risk their personal reputations and professional reputations, but it's not enough. You have to have the measures in place to ensure that can be maintained. And again, bipartisan teams are involved in every aspect. From the moment we start creating the ballots on computers, those computers require 2 passwords to access them, so a Democrat or Republican can't access it independently. Teams proofread the ballots. We have a high-speed production mail system that's operated by bipartisan teams. When we actually do that high-speed production processing of your absentee ballot, it takes an image of that ballot going out, and when that ballot comes back in, there's an image taken of that ballot. So we have a record that was sent, and we have a record that it came back. When we take the mail to the post office, there's a bipartisan team. When we pick up mail from the post office, it's a bipartisan team. When we collect the ballots from our drop box here in front of the Board of Elections, it is a bipartisan team, and the box is secured with a Democratic key and a Republican key, and so they both have to be there together when we take ballots out of the drop box. And so they're there, again, at the post office, regardless of whether we're picking up or dropping off, and they're together when we have to take ballots out of the ballot box, the drop box here at the Board of Elections. When ballots are stored here at the Board of Elections, when they come back to us, they're immediately scanned in, so they're processed in, and we have a record that they were received, and then they're stored in a vault under a Democratic key and Republican key. When we're scanning them, they're bipartisan teams. When the ballots are prepared for scanning, it's a bipartisan team working together to prepare the ballots for scanning. When the results are generated and posted, again, every stage. And when I talk about having a Democratic key and a Republican key, that key is in a key box that requires a palm scan and requires a personal code to be put in. And the Democrats, when you open up that box, the Democrat can only access the keys that they're authorized to open, and a Republican can only access the keys that they're authorized. So again, that provides that control in place so that when ballots are in a room, that it's accessed by Democrat and Republican together. And when it comes to reviewing your absentee ballot applications, your envelopes for the voted ballots, your provisional ballot, if you have to vote provisionally, it's reviewed by the teams. It is reviewed multiple times to ensure that, well, I should say, no ballot's going to get rejected unless it's been reviewed multiple times. And somebody's going to review it. When we're looking at that ballot, we're looking to find ways that we can count that ballot. We're not looking at ways that we can invalidate it. We'll look at not just your registration form. We'll look at every document we have on file, every application you've ever made, anything you've signed that we have a record of that we can compare that signature to. And so we're looking any letter that you might form that's the same, we're going to say then that's the signature. And so we're looking to find ways to count that ballot, not looking for ways to discount it. And I've always said is that if we're rejecting an application for a signature mismatch, you don't need a handwriting expert to tell the difference. It is clearly a different signature. So we take into account that, if the person is older and it appears to be a shaky signature, that it's likely the result of age or some other physical infirmity. So like I said, it's reviewed thoroughly, and if there's an issue, we'll contact you. And so if you get something in the mail, that be on the lookout for it. There was a question I do want to mention in terms of vote by mail. So far, again, if you vote by mail, you will not be alone. Right now, as of today, 218,000 people have submitted requests. And they are the first to get counted. We're actually, in Ohio, we're very fortunate that some of our rules allow us to do things that in other states they can't. In Ohio, we can actually, the moment we get your ballot back, we can, again, I told you, we scan that envelope, we're reviewing it on screen, we're verifying that all the information on the voted ballot envelope is correct. So if there is something that you left off, if you forgot to sign it, or you didn't put your birth date on it, or you didn't put your driver's license or last four of your social security number, if you left some key piece of information off, we're going to immediately contact you and give you the opportunity to correct it. And that's, again, one of those great benefits of voting early and getting your ballot back early, is that if there's a correction to be made, we're going to notify you right away that you need to make that correction. We'll send you a letter, but now this year we'll be able to contact you electronically. So put your email address down, put a telephone number down, so that we can contact you if there's an error on your form. And so what that allows us to do is it allows us to count those ballots. We can actually start scanning ballots before Election Day. We can start, like I said, preparing the ballots to be scanned. We can scan them so that on election night, every ballot that we have received before 7:30 is counted, so is in that result. So it may be sometime in the middle of the afternoon we finished, but everything that is in that 7:30 result is every ballot that we have received before Election Day. So in this election, on election night at 7:30, when those first results are reported, those first results are every absentee ballot that's been received before election day and everyone who's voted early in person at the early vote center. All those get reported at 7:30 on election night. So this election night, like I said, we had 218,000 already who've requested. We could be in a position where 400,000 ballots or more are reported at 7:30 on election night. That's because we're able to do all of that processing before election night. And again, it allows us to have those ballots available and ready. And I think there was some mention about late absentee ballots. Well, actually, there are some ballots that get counted after 7:30. But the thing is, that's completely normal. That's those voters who waited until Monday, November 2nd to get their ballot in the mail and it got postmarked on November 2nd, well, it's not going to arrive. Maybe it arrives on November 3rd, but mostly it's probably going to arrive on Wednesday or Thursday after the election. But the nice thing is the state law gives people, it gives your ballot 10 days to get there. So even if you dropped it in the mail and got it postmarked on November 2nd, we at the Board of Elections and every county board of elections in Ohio have to wait 10 days before to make sure that ballot arrives. And so if it doesn't get here in 10 days after the election, it's not going to count. But again, 10 days after the election, particularly in a county like Franklin, where we have a central mail processing system in the Columbus mail system. So the likelihood your ballot's going to get there within a few days after the election if you get it postmarked on the day before election day. So in terms of some of the COVID precautions we're taking, I just want to make sure, because I know I'm going to have to head out of here because I'm keeping the building security here a little bit later than they usually are. So, but in-person early voting, we've really looked at every aspect of the early vote process. We'll have masks available. We're going to deploy what we call hygiene teams, whose sole purpose is to focus on keeping things clean. One of the things that we're doing is we're going to give every voter it's a little stylus. It's a kind of a pencil, but it's got a rubber tip to it that is suitable for signing the poll pad and making your selections on the electronic voting machine. But what it does is it'll make the voting process as touchless as possible. We'll have a plexiglass barrier at check-in station so that when you're checking in with one of our workers at the early vote center, there'll be a plexiglass barrier between you and them. Like I said, the stylus will make the voting process as touchless from the moment you sign the poll book to the moment you work on the machine. It'll be touchless. We'll have plenty of hand sanitizer there. We'll have disinfectant wipes. But one of the biggest changes we've done at the Board of Elections is we've moved our warehousing operation down to the fairgrounds. What that's done is that's freed up 28,000 square feet, essentially more than doubling the size of our early vote center. And so we'll be able to spread out, we'll be able to have more machines than we had in 2016. We'll actually 60 more machines than we had. We had 90 machines in 2016, and we were able to process 800 voters an hour through the early vote center. We will now have between 140 and 150 machines, and they move faster. They're easier to set up voters on those machines, so the process will be quicker. We'll be able to spread the machines out further, so there'll be plenty of social distance at the early vote center. And so again, we're taking steps to ensure voter safety at the polling locations. We're working on the traffic patterns at the early vote center, having people outside to help direct the traffic so voters can get in and out quickly. Our staff, we're making the sacrifice. Our staff's going to be parking off-site and taking shuttles to the office from an off-site parking lot so that we can make sure that every space available is available for a voter. So we want to make sure it's as easy as possible for voters to access the early vote center and do it safely. On election day, we're going to have masks at every polling location. We'll have masks available for any voter who may have forgotten to bring one, because we don't want that to be something that prevents somebody from voting. Poll workers will have masks. There'll be a safety shield at the check-in station, similar to the plexiglass one, a little bit different, but similar to the plexiglass one that we have at the early vote center. You'll be given a stylus, just like I was talking about for the early vote center, so it'll make the voting process as touchless as possible. And again, hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes. The poll workers will have surgical gloves. We'll have social distancing of machines throughout the process. We've actually had some higher barriers. You may have, if you've used the new machines before in the last couple of elections, we have a privacy shield around them. Well, now we've made those privacy shields a couple feet taller. So if you're standing at a voting machine, you're not looking across at the voter across from you. There'll be a shield that goes up a couple of extra feet to separate you from the voter, any voter that might be near you. So again, our goal is to make the voting process as incredibly positive one as we possibly can, and as incredibly safe as we can. Because again, we recognize the importance of voting, and particularly in this pandemic, we want to do everything we can to make it as safe as possible. And I know I oftentimes, when I'm speaking to a group like this, is just remind the book of James, that faith without works is dead. Is that, and voting is one of the critical ways in which we can put our faith into action by exercising our right to vote, by making selections of candidates that will lead our communities, that make choices on issues that are before us that will affect the future of our community. And by participating in it is one of those ways in which we can put our faith into action. So again, thanks very much for the opportunity to address the group, and I hope I found the information to be helpful. So we look forward to serving you when you show up at the polls or at the early vote center, or when you send us your application.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you. We are going to shift gears quickly so that we can jump into some of the questions. Carol Ware, who's a member of our Get Out the Vote team, is going to talk to you about doing your homework.
Thank you, Minister Washington. Like a carpenter or a plumber or other tradesmen, you have to have the proper tools to do your work. So as a voter, you need to be prepared and informed. That way you can do your job. So when we prepare, that means we got to do some homework. So we have to take time to do some research and prepare ourselves so that we're making informed decisions. Now, the media is full of commercials that can motivate or sometimes confuse voters. So we can't make emotional decisions, but we need to do our research and find out factual as we look into our important. Take the time to do that research. Use and one of those resources that's very, the League of Women Voters has a website, www.vote411.org. You go to that particular site, it gives. So one of the first things you'll need to do is explore the candidates' websites. That's one of the ways you can find out more information. Find out where those candidates stand on it, because they understand that you're doing your homework. Second, if one of those candidates happens to be an incumbent in the House of Representatives or in the Senate, you can go to congress.gov and research their voting records. Find out what issues they concentrate on and how you can contact them to get more information. Don't just assume just because they've been in office forever, they're the candidate. Third, attend some are actually being done virtually. Keep an eye out when they're going to have such instances where you can attend these sessions and learn more and more about the issues and those particular candidates. You even have an opportunity to ask questions. You need to be informed. Now, check those candidates' websites. Again, make sure you follow up on what organization information you're hearing from candidates or even in ads is accurate or something that has been misrepresented. Again, do your homework. So as you do that, the Columbus League Women Voters volunteers, they have compiled information on a number of different voting issues. They have forms and already this evening. Homeless in Ohio voting, what those rights are. Voting rights for new Americans. Voter information. Those who may be 17 and just about available in their resource bucket. Learn what's on your ballot. They have information that's specific to your county. They can give you information on the candidates, and they even create a guide that helps you look for information on their site. They have a local office, the Metropolitan Columbus League of Women Voters, and their website is noted on this slide here, mylwv.org/Ohio/metropolitan-Columbus. That's how you can find out more and more information. Make informed decisions because your vote does count. We talked earlier about some of those candidate forums. Here's just a sample of some of the ones that are available currently. These are some that the League of Women Voters have already scheduled. You see some as early as September 29th and 30th, all the way up until mid-October. And more of these will be held. The NAACP will be holding some other community organizations, some of the churches will be hosting candidate forums. Those are usually advertised in the media. Keep an eye out, listen for those, and prepare yourself so that when you make your vote, it really does count and it's an informed selection. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Let's jump in and have some questions. There's a number of questions I know that have been put into the chat. We are going to open things up now, and Carol has been taking a look at your questions as they're coming in.
Right.
I think, Ed, if I'm not mistaken, while you were up, you were actually looking at some questions too and responding, doing your presentation.
Right.
So, Carol, let's put some questions out
Sure.
to the panel.
I think one of the first questions we received that Ed did address, it says there's been a lot of talk about absentee ballots not being counted until days after November 3rd. Is there an Ohio law that prevents absentee ballots from being counted prior to the election day? And I think Ed already addressed the fact that as soon as those are received, those are counted. Ed, did you need to add anything to that?
No, I really addressed it. So
Okay, thank you. Have another question. Does vote site apply to all states? Deidre?
Ready.vote is only Ohio, but the Ohio Unity Coalition is part of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation, and they do have a site where you can check for other states, but you can actually check directly with the Secretaries of State in other states, but ncbcp.org, you can check for other states, but Ready.vote is specific to Ohio only.
Okay, thank you.
I'll put it in the chat so people
Okay.
can that one up.
The next question, is it fraud if you drop off an absentee ballot for someone else in person? And I think that was addressed as well. As long as it's a family member, it's okay. But anyone else want to address that?
I did note that in the chat was that you can't, there are limitations on who can drop off a ballot, but there aren't limitations on who can drop off an absentee application. So, because we've already had some churches who've done some absentee application drives, And the applications can be, you can bring somebody's application back when you bring yours, or collect up some of your neighbors' applications and bring them back as a group. That's okay.
Okay, thank you. The next question, would it be considered fraud if we are early voting from our current residence, but by November 3rd, we've moved into a new residence on October 31st?
You'll be made to vote a provisional ballot, but because you will have been listed in the poll book as having voted. Yeah, I would not recommend doing that just because you've already cast a ballot. So I don't think you'd be prosecuted for it, because we'd see that it was a provisional ballot, but it would be, I would not recommend doing that. If you've actually voted, you shouldn't try and go to a new residence or a new polling location and vote again.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What do you suggest we say to those we are trying to encourage to vote who feel their vote will not matter, since there's a chance that the outcome may not be honored?
I just, I think you've got to do it, though. You still have to cast that ballot. Because it is your voice. And so if there's somebody at a different level or the national level that doesn't want to respect it, but the statement was made that this is what the people chose. And so that's why you've got to make your voice heard. And that voice with millions of others is the only thing that's ever going to be listened to.
And if
I could add to that, I would also say we have to understand that, this is an election season, and personalities aside, a lot of people say things because they're trying to get people to behave one way or another. And we just have to understand that's just part of the dynamic. I think at the end of the day, people will respond appropriately, even though we may feel that is not the case. But I think, the outcome is going to be the outcome, and the will of the people is the will of the people. And we just have to rest on that and not be, some things are intended to make us behave a particular way, but we should behave what is in the realm of what is our civic duty.
And I think the other thing I would add is that it's not just one race on the ballot. You're picking so many people from so many levels of government who are going to influence your life. And so whether it's in the legislature or at the county level, there are so many other people. And to your point about, the effort to try and persuade you to give up on that right to vote, that's exactly what people want you to do, is to be so discouraged by it, so turned off to not do it.
Excuse me, I have a question. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think you misunderstood my question. I was the one asked about moving to a different residence. I'm not voting again. I'm early voting, but we are moving. Okay, so I'm early voting, but I'm not going to vote again at my new residence. So I'm kind of lost in what you said.
Okay, so
my current residence up until October the 31st.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but me and my husband plan to vote from this residence, early voting. Come November, we will be in our new residence. I'm not going to vote again.
Okay.
That's good.
As long as you vote.
That is good.
Yeah, if you're not moving until October the 31st, I would just say early vote prior to the 31st, and it's a non-issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's what you do, is to vote before the 31st, before you move.
Dr. Smooth wanted to say something.
I wanted to speak to this point about if things won't be counted and the like. If there is no record, there is nothing we can contest, right? There is likely in some states, in some counties, we are likely to see litigation. That we see it every election cycle. It's often very low key sometimes. This may be at a higher pitch, and we will hear those things. But if there is no record, there is nothing that can be contested. So we still have to put it out there. And to the other speaker's point, we still have to perform our duty, right? And we have to be in the arena, and then let other powers take force if it's a litigation process and the like. But if we have not voted, we can't litigate.
And I apologize, but I'm going to need to excuse myself from it because I've kept our security staff here for an extra half hour. So again, I appreciate the opportunity and thank you all. And again, encourage everyone you know to exercise that right to vote. Thank you for what you're doing to help mobilize the community in this effort. Good
Thank
night,
you
everyone.
for your service.
Thank you so much, Ed.
Thank you so much, Ed.
Take care.
God bless. Mhm.
Our next question, what are the options to track your ballot? And if it appears it has not been timely delivered to the board?
I can speak to that. This is where a provisional ballot does come into play. The first thing I would reiterate again is vote early so that you do have the option to track and give time for it to go through the process. But if you are tracking and it really does not arrive, that's when you do want to go ahead, go in. They'll have a record that you've requested it, but you vote a provisional ballot. They're only going to count one. So that's your backup so that you're not disenfranchised. And, as Ed said, the likelihood that somebody's going to say, oh, Deidre tried to vote twice, and you have an issue on that, you'll be able to say, I tried to track, it's not there. You have no record that I actually sent it back in, but the provisional is your backup and your safety net that you get to actually cast a ballot, and they will only count one.
Thank you. Next question. How are residents of assisted living being contacted since they are currently isolated? Can a power of attorney vote for that resident?
No, they cannot. Power of attorney does not have that, is actually restricted under law. If they are in an assisted living facility and they are a registered voter, they would have received the application for an absentee ballot as well, and they would be able to vote in that particular manner.
One thing that they, and I don't know if they still do this, but one thing that they used to do is if you were hospitalized or incapacitated, they will send someone out to you and let you cast your vote that way.
That's correct. Yeah, you could still do it that way, or you can do it by mail, but they should have received the application this time from Secretary of State.
The next question, what is a provisional ballot?
Somebody's going to ask this question. It is basically for lack of a better phrase, an alternative type of ballot. It's not a regular ballot or an absentee ballot, but it's that backup ballot that they will count in the event that you don't cast a regular ballot in person on election day or an absentee ballot early. So just as that previous example, you requested an absentee ballot and it never made it back. You say you mailed it in and it never made it back, or you showed up either early or on election day and your name, they can't find your name on the book. Maybe you went to the wrong location because you never updated your registration. They can't find your name. They have to allow you to vote that provisional ballot so they can verify, yes, you are a resident of Ohio. You're supposed to be allowed to vote, and you can fix it if something was missing, like you didn't have the right ID on you at the time. So you would be able to correct that, but it just allows you, it's that safety net so that you as a voter will be able to actually participate in the process.
Thank you. Is anyone in this group working at a polling location?
Okay.
Any hands?
Had one.
Okay, just one.
If you know young people, And Leonard
That's great.
mentioned that they are actively
Uh,
recruiting poll workers, but if you know young people in particular, because we know this is a tried and true tradition of our seniors who serve our communities in this way, and we're going to give them the day off on this one in light of the pandemic.
Right.
And so if you know of young people, it's a wonderful way. You have to be digital, can give more, but 17 years of age or older to be trained as a poll worker. You can do the training online. It's very simple and direct training. So encourage the young people in your life to step up and take this one for our seniors.
Yeah. Everyone, it's 8:32. And I don't know about you, but this has been a high impact, outstanding evening. I want to thank our panelists for everything that they've shared with us tonight. So for those of you that know how to click on the reactions, we want to just give a big round of applause to our panelists tonight, Dr. Wendy Smoove, Deidre Reese, and Ed Leonard in his absence. And we also, Carol Ware of our Get Out the Vote team and the work that she did to say, do your homework. We're going to close out tonight with a challenge and a closing prayer coming from Deacon Guy Reese.
Thank you, Minister Washington. First of all, one of the things that we should all think about when we think about voting is how important that one vote is. It takes a lot of ones to make many, and it's critically important that you cast your ballot. One example of that would be Adolf Hitler would not have been the ruler of Germany, but for one vote. And just think, maybe we should have made sure that person didn't show up. But also, one of the things when they were deciding what language to have in the US, one vote made it English instead of German. So critically important that you realize your vote is very important. I always like to say, when you get up on Wednesday morning, November the 4th, and you look in the mirror, what will you say? Did I do my job? Did I vote? Critically important that you do that, and that you're able to look at that person in the mirror and say, I did my part. If you can't do that, we don't want to hear you on November the 5th, November the 6th, January 20th, when a new president is sworn in. But it's not only a president, it's also local officials. Critically important. Vote down the ballot. With that, I think life is filled with a lot of challenges, but we're equipped to face them and to execute our part. It's critically important that we do that. And if you would, bow your head at this time. And one thing I will say is that in 2019, there were 840,000 registered voters in Franklin County. 185,000 voted. In 2016, 843,000 voters. 593,000 voted. We need to beat that number in 2020. 2020 says eyesight. Let's make sure we do it. If you would, please bow your head. Dear Lord, we thank you for this day. Lord, we thank you for Minister Washington and Pastor Washington for thinking of this idea and getting us energized to make our vote count. We thank you for the panelists that have participated in this effort. And Lord, we would ask you to continue to inspire and challenge them to continue to do what they're doing, because they are forming something that will benefit not only themselves, but all of us. We would ask you to renew in us the spirit of John Lewis. Let us perform the most courageous, nonviolent act that we can possibly do. Make us all voters, and let us go out and encourage our friends, our families, our neighbors, even our enemies to vote. Let it be our own good trouble. And we would ask you to bless and keep us. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Good
Thank
night,
you.
everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.